The Trumpet Daily program begins right now.
Today's world news, what it means, where it's taking us.
I bring you the one and only possible message of world peace.
This is a message of hope, tremendous hope. And he said unto me, you must prophesy again.
The Trumpet Daily program begins right now.
I'm saying, just as the left likes to play with very dark, ugly stuff, and they've done it for decades, they have played down Chairman Mao's murder of the Chinese throughout his era in power. They played down Stalin. They still march on occasions with posters of Lenin. They've spent decades trying to do down evils that were done on their side. And I would suggest that one of the things that is going on at the moment is, despite, or maybe because of what you just described, there are movements now on the right in America, subcultures, including people who follow both of you, who are very interested in playing with this absolute beyond the pale thing. Why somebody like Jake Shields wants to play around with Holocaust denial? Why?
Why? Good question. How does this happen? So it's not that long ago. And you see people working hard, just as I touched on yesterday at the end of the show. They're working hard to revise history. And history is one of our greatest teachers. You're listening to Stephen Flurry, and this is the Trumpet Daily. We appreciate you joining us on today's show. The last show of the week, hard to believe. It's also a travel day. So I didn't get through as much news today, but we've got more of a history lesson and a Bible study lesson lined up for you today. You can get to the live video stream of this show at trumpetdaily.com or at the Rumble channel, rumble.com/Trumpet Daily. The email address, if you'd like to email the show, td@thetrumpet.com. Today on the show, we've also got this week's edition of World Watch. We'll probably reserve that for the very end of the show, so you can look forward to that. So that was Douglas Murray, as I touched on yesterday. He was on with Joe Rogan, and he was asking, why are you giving a platform to people like Daryl Cooper, who comes on and just says, yeah, the villain of World War II was Winston Churchill. What? How does this happen? Why does this happen? Why? It's, as he said yesterday, I played the clips. It sounds kind of edgy. It gets some attention. It gets some criticism. And if the criticism's too intense, then they can hide behind the fact that, well, I'm not a real historian. I'm more of a comedian. And yet the message goes out. The false narrative goes out to tens of millions of people. I mean, that causes damage. That causes a lot of damage. Listen again to Douglas Murray on Joe Rogan's podcast not that long ago, clip 6.
What these two guys in particular have said on repeated podcasts with both of you, it's an attempt to downplay Hitler and always to do down Churchill.
I don't think you downplayed Hitler.
Whatever way they can. No, I said in conversations with you and others, this is the shtick of these guys. They've decided it's edgy and funny, and I think this is very, very interesting and also very dangerous, because we live in an era now that the right has got some mojo back in America. We saw years of crazy left overreach where they tried to make us all say the craziest things. And completely predictably, there are now figures on the right playing with really dark and ugly stuff on their side.
I agree
and
with
they
that.
are mainstreaming
I don't
this,
think
and I
Daryl's
think it's
doing that.
partly being mainstreamed by the two people I just described. And both of you have kept speaking to these people, and you don't get on the historians who know about this. And that's just alarming to me.
Someone wrote in following yesterday's show saying that we need Douglas Murray on this program. There's just only so many outlets left that are proclaiming the truth. Jesus talked, one of the things that stands out, there's many themes, but one of the things that stands out in going through the life and teachings of Christ this past school year is just how much emphasis our Lord and Savior put on the truth We worship God in spirit and in truth. Earlier this week, I talked about, what happens when you just get a little bit off course, when you just wander away from the truth, even a little bit, when you just slip up a tiny, tiny amount. The Bible has a lot to say about this as well. In the Psalms, it says, don't let me wander even. Don't let me wander from your commandments. We've got to stay on a sure foundation. And history is right there with Bible prophecy. I mean, when prophecy is fulfilled, then it becomes fulfilled prophecy that is history. And history is to be our guide. It should be. I mean, this is what great individuals of history like Winston Churchill always said. He used history as his guide. I'll play a clip for you later from Victor Davis Hanson where he says, you go back to the Greeks and the Romans and you realize that, we're the same people. We're like the Greeks. We're like the Romans. You could go back farther than that and say we are today just like the ancient Israelites of old. I mean, all the more so because we're Israel in prophecy. The United States and Britain and Australia and Canada, New Zealand. We are Israel, the modern day descendants. And so Paul, and just to take one example, the passage in 1 Corinthians 10, he goes back through this critical history from ancient Israel and he says, now this history's for you. This history, the examples, the lessons, they are for you. Don't forget them. Don't make the same mistakes. Don't travel down the same path that they did. You can see why. I mean, Douglas Murray is saying there, look, you don't bring on the proper historians to set the record straight. You just let Darrell Cooper wax eloquent about Hitler, downplaying his hatred for Jews, and Churchill being the bad guy, even though, as I said yesterday, or I played the clip from Andrew Roberts, the chronology doesn't even fit. Churchill wasn't even around. He wasn't prime minister when Hitler was rolling through Czechoslovakia, Poland, Holland, Belgium. He wasn't even there. They brought him in reluctantly at the very last minute. And he helped to save Western civilization. I played a bit from that uncommon knowledge discussion. You had, I forget the name of the host, but you had Andrew Roberts, you had Neil Ferguson, you had Victor Davis Hanson. I mean, that's quite a collection of historians right there. A pretty good discussion. And for his part, I mean, or actually I think this might be Neil Ferguson, who was saying that, in some ways it's not even worth wasting our time to respond to these kinds of obviously false narratives. But listen to clip 7.
Why are we wasting our time talking about the ravings of somebody who clearly has done no serious research, not even at the undergraduate level, on the history of the Second World War? I find it really frustrating that we're even having to have this discussion about somebody who clearly is an ignoramus at best, and at worst is an apologist for Nazism.
An apologist for Nazism. He points out how that Darrell Cooper and those like him, they haven't even put in their research. Now, again, there's plenty of radical left-wing historians. I don't want to just overlook that maybe even put in research and follow after a trail of false narratives, hearsay, whatever it is. I mean, it's human nature, the propensity we have for lying and deceit. It's beyond the pale. But he brings up a good point. I mean, these are not even, they're not even qualified historians. And they sit down at a podcast and speak to tens of millions of people. I've mentioned this example before when I went through Ron Chernow's book on Ulysses S. Grant. It's a great book, and I'm not sure about his political leanings. Most historians lean a little bit to the left, at least. But it was an exceptional book on Ulysses S. Grant, the greatest general America has ever had. And then he became a president after the Civil War. But what fascinated me, I think, most was getting to the end of Chernow's book, and I think it was about 1,000 pages. It's been some years since I read it, but it was about 1,000 pages, and he talked about all of the research and just how many people helped him to research this subject. He said at the end of his book, historians can no longer caricature Grant as an empty-headed dunce, a stereotype that has particularly damaged assessment of his presidency. He says the Grant who emerges from these papers is articulate and thoughtful, with a firm grasp of many issues. He's talking about something like 50,000 documents that he obtained from Southern Illinois University, or that university published them. And he went through it, and it was a 6-year study for Chernow. And as I've said before, you read through one book, and it's like you're getting a college course. One man just immersed himself into this study and said at the end of it, you can't caricature him any longer. It doesn't line up with the evidence, with the receipts, with all of these papers that have been revealed. This is from the Mississippi Library. Again, Chernow refers to that. In addition to the 50,000 documents from the published papers, the library contains another 200,000 documents that never made it into print, a scholarly feast for anyone even remotely curious about Grant. I mean, this is the way a true historian would approach his assignment. I'm going to get into these documents that most people have never even seen. It's a scholarly feast, after all. I especially profited from the numerous oral histories, profiles, newspaper interviews, letters, and diaries that conjure up Grant's life with extraordinary vividness. He talked about all the original documents in the Library of Congress. I mean, so many people today that just pop off with this nonsense. They've never even set foot in a library. It's sad. The people taking to the streets, protesting in support of Hamas. Do you think they know about the Hamas charter? Do you think they know about the history? Do you think they know about the failure of the so-called peace process and the two-state solution? They're just out there spewing what some left-wing professor, a teacher, an educator on the university campus is telling them to proclaim. It says here, Grant's personal memoirs, bound in 9 volumes and ordinarily kept under lock and key. This came from the Library of Congress. To see Grant's slanted, wobbly handwriting in his final days was indescribably moving. Chernow went through it all. You've got to give him credit. He talked about all of these people that opened up Antietam, Gettysburg, Shiloh, Vicksburg. It wasn't enough just to read and study about Grant. He went to the battlefield, literally. He went to the places that Ulysses Grant visited, where Ulysses Grant fought in the Civil War. As I say, he was immersed into it. It says, one reward of Grant research was that it lured me to many corners of the country that had been terra incognita for me. He had never seen them. Anyone who has made the rounds of Civil War battlefields must admire the professionalism and encyclopedic knowledge of the guides and park rangers. I've been to several of those sites myself, and it is moving. And so many of these park rangers, they know their history, and they're there to retell it. Very helpful, very informative, very educational. This is just one example. Whether you take Churchill or Grant or an author like Chernow or those historians you see in that discussion, uncommon knowledge, it is uncommon. Why won't you have them on? Douglas Murray says to Joe Rogan. I mean, that's pretty bold. Good for him, as I said yesterday. Let's get a real historian. How about that? And see what he has to say regarding Winston Churchill. As I say, every historian's a little bit different. They're all biased in one way or another. I remember after reading William Manchester's series on Winston Churchill, just a fabulous study. 3 volumes. Manchester wrote the first 2. The first 2 are by far better than the third one, but we'll leave that aside. But then I read another book by Manchester. I mean, his heyday was, I think, in the 1970s and 80s. Prolific author, wrote lots of books, and I got another one about, I think it was U.S. history in the 1920s and 30s. And I was shocked, really, to see how left-wing his worldview was. I mean, with Churchill, maybe because Churchill wasn't an American, or I guess he was half American, but anyway, he was the British PM and saved Western civilization. I mean, his study on Churchill, he hit the nail on the head there. And then with this other one, I didn't even finish it. It wasn't worth the time. So you do have to be selective. I mean, even with historians. But to just let someone come on who's not even put in the research, a Nazi apologist, and he goes on, and, you know, there's no one on these podcasts to challenge them. It's shocking. I mean, you've seen it for decades, as Douglas Murray was saying, on the radical left side. But to see conservatives now skewing these lessons of history or blotting them out or whitewashing them away, it's stunning to see. Let me just take you back to this uncommon knowledge discussion with the 3 historians. Clip 1.
The historical errors we've discussed. 1619 Project, the United States was fundamentally racist from its founding. Darrell Cooper, Churchill, not Hitler, was responsible for the war in Europe. Max Boot and William Appleman Williams, the United States started the Cold War and the Soviets ended it. Where does all this self-loathing come from? Isn't that the through line here?
I think one of the distinguishing features of the English-speaking world has been self-criticism. The people of the English-speaking world have been critical of themselves. Now, at times that habit becomes a pathology, and I think the hatred of America that's a characteristic feature of the left in the United States today, like the hatred of Britain that you encounter in the UK, is no longer a healthy self-criticism. It's a destructive, nihilistic desire to reject all the legacy of the past. But these days, you're not allowed to consider the achievements. You can only write about the evils.
Quite a comment there at the end. You can't really concentrate on the achievements if you're a Western journalist or author or historian. Just the evils. You've just got to draw attention. And I mean, he sugarcoated it some, Neil Ferguson. The interviewer got it right. How do you explain this self-loathing, this self-hatred? Well, of course Churchill made mistakes. Every leader does. But to just, because of that, a few mistakes, say, yeah, he's responsible for World War II. What is wrong with people? What is wrong with our thinking? Well, it's just more proof, as if we need it anymore, that Satan's the god of this world. Satan is a historical revisionist. Yeah, my father's written in the Ezekiel booklet. He likes to blot out his own history. He doesn't want to be reminded of his glorious history as Lucifer, this great archangel that God created and trained at the throne room of God. And then he gave him this magnificent assignment on earth, together with a third of the angels. I want you to go and administer God's government on earth and beautify and maintain and make better God's creation. And they didn't do it because of rebellion and lawlessness, because of sin. And so Satan wants to blot out that history and act like it never happened, and of course bombard people today. He's the prince of the power of the air with this message that his way of get and competition and strife and self-hatred, self-loathing, that these are all good things. You see it from historians. I mean, the ones that want to revise the history. They talk about how evil America is. You see them on MSNBC, the talking heads, and they're so proud of themselves. Yeah, we're horrible. We're evil. We're racist. As they make their millions in a society, an American society that they probably couldn't make anywhere else in the world. But we'll leave that aside as well. Neil Ferguson here. The interviewer brings this out, but they discuss in this same roundtable just the propensity to forget important history. Clip 8.
It matters to democracy. You are writing, all three of you, for ordinary educated laymen. You are not professional historians writing monographs for other professional historians. Every one of you, I think, takes it as a kind of implicit duty to explain, to tell the story to your fellow British subjects, to your fellow Americans. And I would like to know why. What difference does it make? How can history help us?
Well, we're the anti-amnesia shock troops. Our job is to fight against the human propensity to forget. The United States is extremely bad at remembering. It has a kind of permanent state of amnesia. It's not even clear that one administration is aware of what the previous one did. And so the historian's role is to try to supply that collective memory that we would otherwise lack.
The anti-amnesia shock troops, he says there. And notice how he draws attention to America and how that we're extremely bad at remembering. My father, when he was fired from the Worldwide Church of God for holding fast to all of God's teachings as they were given to Herbert Armstrong over the course of his long ministry, he wrote Malachi's message. That's the centerpiece of our work. And I mean, it starts off, page 1. It talks about the importance of remembering and holding fast. I mean, this is important to God. We've got to learn from history, or as you've heard over and again, it's just become a mindless slogan now that if we don't learn from it, we're going to repeat it. History does repeat itself. It may not play out exactly like it did previously. Of course, we've got progress, quote unquote. We've got new technologies and that sort of thing. But human nature is the same. In fact, 2 Timothy 3 and verse 13 says that human nature is to get worse and worse and worse. I'll play you a couple of clips from Victor Davis Hanson in a moment. He has an understanding of human nature. That's why he says, we are the Greeks. We are the Romans. We're the same people. We're human beings. Progressives like for us to think that, just write about the evil of Winston Churchill and then kind of color the whole period as evil. But they're very self-righteous. Today, we know, look at how much evil we're able to spot when looking at the life of Winston Churchill or Ulysses Grant. He had a problem with alcoholism, and Chernow even immersed himself into that weakness just so that he could try to understand Grant better. Again, there's flaws there. There were obviously flaws. But Lincoln was inclined to say, whatever he's drinking, give him more, because he's winning some battles. That was important for the North, for Abraham Lincoln. They had to win in that struggle, and it was the same with Churchill. Consider the alternative. Think about our propensity to forget. America is bad at remembering. This is from the Former Prophets. My father wrote this. Bible history is the greatest history of all because it's God's history. These books show that if we live the same lifestyles our forefathers did, we will attain virtually the same results, good or bad. History becomes prophecy. Not all prophecy is history, but a lot of history becomes prophecy. History prophesies the fate of nations. whether they will thrive or collapse. He says this is a law of history. This is a law. We can't get around this. As I say, Paul in 1 Corinthians 10, he takes us through so many of the lessons that we need to take away from ancient Israel. I mean, they left Egypt with a high hand, all this miraculous intervention on the part of God, and they get out there just a few days later, and they're already criticizing and complaining and grumbling. I mean, look at the way so many modern historians and scholars and educators, look at the way they view history. It's like you heard in one of those clips. It's all negative. It's all evil. I mean, we're just in it to basically expose the flaws of these towering figures of the past. It's a shame. God wants us to learn. This is actually some of my notes from 1 Corinthians 10. He wants us to learn from the mistakes, but also he wants an emphasis to be on the good, the successes. And that's really what you see throughout the Bible. I mean, you study the great heroes of the Bible. There's a good summary of that in Hebrews 11. And you see a lot of flaws. You see a lot of mistakes. And you also see God's mighty hand. And you also see what happens when these great men and women of the Bible obeyed God and trusted him in faith. My father has said that history is one of the most important subjects we can study. And he puts the priority on Bible history, church history. We've got a great booklet on the true history of God's true church. If you don't have a copy of that, make sure you call our operators and request that free booklet. There's no cost, no obligation. It's a powerful booklet that takes you through the 2,000-year history of God's church. Why is it so different? Why are the churches today and their teachings, particularly at times of year like this, the so-called Holy Week, why are there so many things that denominations in this world today participate in that have no grounding in Scripture? Why don't you see them in the Scriptures? Why aren't they talked about in the book of Acts? Why didn't Jesus mention them? Why didn't Jesus say, look, for this particular holiday, it's got kind of a religious slant to it. This is how you make the most of it. This is how you observe it. This is how you obey my laws with respect to this tradition. You see that with respect to God's holy days. You see it all through the Bible. Here's how you observe it. You can also look at the history of our nations. I said earlier that, we're the modern day descendants of ancient Israel. So our own history teaches us so much. It should. My father says in the Chronicles booklet, this is another booklet he wrote, he says, the world is lost in the present. God is always challenging his people to keep the overview, to see the grand sweep, both historically and prophetically. God's always challenging us to see the big picture, to keep the big overview in mind. So, just to go back to this example with Chernow, I mean, if he's immersing his life, his own life, 6 years of it, into the study of another life, Ulysses Grant, and he's traveling the country, he's visiting all these Civil War sites, he's reading 50,000 documents, he's looking at newspaper articles and interviews and so on. I mean, he has some insights into Grant that most other people would not have. I mean, I know there's other books on Grant, but I mean, this was an exhaustive study for sure. And you can see that at the end of the book, where he acknowledges all the people that helped him come to that understanding. Listen to this from that Uncommon Knowledge discussion. This is VDH on human nature. And here again, you don't hear wisdom like this in the educational discourse on college campuses today. I mean, we just think we're so much better than those that came before us. But here's Davis Hanson's take on human nature, clip 10.
I think also every historian, whether they're overt about it, assumes that human nature stays constant across time and space. And it's sort of the tragic view of history versus the therapeutic. In other words, in our modern age, we believe if you give people enough power, enough technology, enough improvement in the material conditions, they can alter, make a new man like the Soviet Union. And therefore, history is not necessary because the new man reacts so differently from the past man that it would be useless.
In other words, modern education believes that you can sort of fashion this new man with a new heart that's nothing like the heart of those of old. And so you don't really need history. You don't need to learn the lessons of history because we're so much better, because we've progressed, because we've evolved. That is exactly what the devil wants for us to believe, that we have come so far that there is no possible way that this world could erupt in war, world war, just as has happened throughout history. Listen again to Victor Davis Hanson, clip 11.
Human nature, even though it's technology and wealth and all different types of environments and landscapes change and it's almost unrecognizable, that we're still the same people as the Greeks or the Romans. And our appetites are what drives us. And so if you can capture a war of the past or a diplomatic crisis or a presidency or what Andrew does, a great biography, then that is going to be, we don't say that we're going to be didactic or utilitarian, but that's an implicit idea that we're going to help people understand the present by elucidating the past because we're the same people.
Help people understand the present by elucidating the past because we're the same people. We're talking about the same nature. In fact, as I just said, Paul said in 2 Timothy 3 that evil men and seducers will wax worse and worse. The Bible actually says it would be worse. Human nature would be even worse in these very last days. You look at how quickly evil can spread. Sin, lawlessness can spread so quickly because of lawlessness. It wasn't like this 100 years ago, 200 years ago. But now the filth celebrated and promoted by Israelite nations, we got to say it, can spread around the world with a snap of a finger. The filth that Hollywood produces, all the pornography coming out of California, just circling the globe. That couldn't have happened in centuries past. I mean, we've always had sexual sins and prostitution and those kinds of things, but the way that technology facilitates the fast movement of evil, lightning quick, push of a button. Human nature is the same, but all of these accessories, they really do make it easier to spread the filth more quickly, and that's what we're seeing. Jesus said that in the last days it would be just like the days of Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, Sodom and Gomorrah anciently, those were two cities. They're in the Jordan Valley, and both those cities went up in flames. God rained fire and brimstone from heaven. And Jesus said the world, not two cities, the world would be like Sodom and Gomorrah in these last days. That's what Christ said. Supposedly we're celebrating Jesus Christ this week. Well, let's look at what Jesus taught. Let's look at some of the signs that he left us. It's going to be like it was in the days right before the flood. It's going to be like the days of Sodom and Gomorrah. And make sure you learn the lesson of Sodom's wife, or rather Lot's wife. She left. She was reluctant to leave. She was dragging her feet. And then she turned around and she looked back on these evil, perverse societies longingly. She didn't want to leave it. She didn't leave it in her heart. God says, make sure you remember that. Make sure that when it's time to go, whether you look at the history lesson that's there with ancient Israel coming out of Egypt or Lot's wife coming out of Sodom, just go. Keep your eyes on Jesus Christ. Hebrews 12, 1 and 2. Look to Jesus Christ. Lay aside every weight those sins that so easily beset us, and just run in this race. Run with Christ. Come out of this world. Revelation 18, verse 4. Come out of Egypt. Let me just point you to one example from the Old Testament. There's a wonderful history lesson wrapped up in this. It's in 2 Chronicles 34 and verse 1. It says, "Now in the 18th year of his reign, when he had purged the land and the house, he sent Shaphan and the son of Azaliah and Maaseiah, the governor of the city, and Joah, the son of Joahaz, the recorder, to repair the house of the eternal his God." Josiah, I mean, he got an early start in his reign, just as a little boy. But here he is, I think he's around 26 at the time of this purging. He's going about the land of Judah and even beyond their borders to purge the land of paganism and idolatry, to just stamp it out and restore some glory to Judah. Look down at verse 14. It says, "And when they brought out the money that was brought into the house of the Eternal, Hilkiah the priest found a book of the law of the Eternal given by Moses." So I guess you can look back at the chronology and do the math, but I think we're talking about 600 years or so. This book of Moses, a book that Moses penned. So it's a 600-year-old document. Think about what Chernow would have done with that. Wow! I don't know if he would have gotten as excited about a Bible document as he did about the Grant papers that were only, about 100 years old. But here's one that's, 6 centuries old. And look at how Josiah and Hilkiah responded to this. You can see over in 2 Kings 22 and verse 8, "I have found the book of the law." I've found it. I've found it. Maybe Moses had his own autograph on this particular copy, this text. Verse 18, it says, "Then Shaphan, the scribe, told the king, saying, Hilkiah, the priest, has given me a book. And Shaphan read it before the king, King Josiah. And it came to pass, when the king had heard the words of the law, that he rent his clothes." I mean, think about this for a moment. Here was a young man in his 20s. He had spent years purging the land of Judah of idolatry. He pulverized all these pagan idols that were throughout the land. He burned the bones of the priests, the pagan priests, upon the altars. And then he discovers this book, or it was discovered. Hilkiah found it. And Hilkiah reads the words to him. And this king, this young king, is moved by this history, this truth, these laws of God. Verse 29, "And the king sent and gathered together all the elders of Judah and Jerusalem. And the king went up into the house of the Eternal, and all the men of Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem and the priests and the Levites," everybody, you see, "and all the people, great and small. And he read in their ears all the words of the book of the covenant that was found in the house of the Eternal." He read the words. I mean, this would suggest, I'm sure there were other copies that Josiah had in his day. But you can read between the lines here and see that they had gotten away from it. There's a propensity among Israelites to forget all that God has taught them, all of the teachings of God, the truth. So the words were read, and Josiah was moved, so much so that he called all of the people, the priests, everybody. Everybody gathered, everybody heard the recitation, everybody received the sermon. It says in verse 31, "And the king stood in his place and made a covenant before the Eternal to walk after the Eternal and to keep his commandments and his testimonies and his statutes with all his heart and with all his soul, to perform the words of the covenant which are written in this book." So a really prayerful, repentant attitude, which is what God is looking for. And he caused all that were present in Jerusalem and Benjamin to stand to it. And the inhabitants of Jerusalem did according to the covenant of God, the God of their fathers. What a turnaround. What an inspiration this book was, this 600-year-old book for the people of Judah. Verse 33, and Josiah took away all the abominations out of all the countries that pertained to the children of Israel, and made all that were present in Israel to serve, even to serve the Lord their God. And all his days they departed not from following the Lord, the God of their fathers. All of this after reading and studying a 600-year-old document that was discovered in the temple as they were making repairs and cleaning it up. It triggered a great awakening in Judah. What a history lesson. There's so many lessons to learn from history, in this case, Bible history. Listen to Neil Ferguson as he talks about how much we can learn from history. Clip 9.
I think we have an absolutely clear obligation to try to learn from history, and that's what motivates me every day. It's sometimes rather tedious work. I'm not sure if I'd understood at the start how much history would just involve ploughing through the letters of dead people, that I necessarily would have spent 40 or 50 years doing it. But it is a very necessary task, and all the more necessary when charlatans like Darrell Cooper, legitimized by Tucker Carlson, tell outright lies about the past to the American public and indeed to the world.
And are being downloaded by 33 million people, because unless you do fight back on every front, who's to say whether these absurd and very dangerous conspiracy theories won't take root?
As I said yesterday, I mean, you can see why people are going down this rabbit hole by the tens of millions, because there are so many conspiracy theories that are conspiracies. We've been told so many lies. And so why not believe lies about, 9/11 or some other subject? It's easy to just say, yeah, we were lied about this. We were lied to about this. All those lies during COVID and this and that. And Satan now, I mean, he's taking that and running with it. We're really at a point where, well, the Bible says truth is cast to the ground. Truth is being buried. It really is Orwellian in every way. I mentioned this Telegraph piece yesterday. American conservatives turn on Winston Churchill. Talks about how Douglas Murray, the best-selling author's ire, was triggered by these conservative influencers that are showing up on Joe Rogan's podcast or Tucker Carlson. It says in this piece, I gave you this yesterday, it says this is a very clear movement on a subset of the American right, but it's a growing movement, and that's why I believe it's important to challenge it. That's quoting from Douglas Murray. It's a growing movement. The Holocaust deniers, Hamas supporters, terrorist sympathizers. It's a growing number of people that are in these camps. My father says, just to come back to Winston Churchill, this is what I think triggered it for Douglas Murray, but he says in his booklet, my father does, our leaders lacked the watchman quality of a strong leader like Churchill. He faced reality and spoke the truth in a dangerous world. These are wonderful traits, character traits, facing reality, facing up to danger, having a courageous fighting spirit. It says most leaders in the U.S. and the U.K. lived in a weak world of illusion. And these are some lessons that we could learn from, because many leaders today are living in the world of illusion. Martin Gilbert wrote the greatest biography ever of this great leader, Churchill, The Prophet of Truth. That was in the title of his biography, referring to that period in 1922 to 39. He was in the wilderness, but he was a prophet of truth. He had the truth when so many others did not. they were living an illusion, as my father says. The U.S. was even more pacifist than Britain. And keep in mind, like Neil Ferguson said, the propensity that we have as Americans to forget. Both nations made horrendous misjudgments about Hitler. We should be embarrassed even today by our shameful weakness against one of the worst tyrants ever. Horrendous misjudgments about Hitler. And here we are today, making the exact same mistakes. Revising the history. Yeah, I think Churchill was the problem. I think Hitler, wasn't so bad. Consider this from Bret Stephens. This was in a column years ago. This was when all these Winston Churchill movies were coming out. He says Churchill, he's talking about Andrew Roberts, was able to rouse Britain because the battles and struggles of the Elizabethan and Napoleonic Wars were then taught in schools. So the stories of Drake and Nelson were well known to his listeners. And then Stephens says, that also cannot be said of us today. In Britain, a 2008 survey found that 20% of teenagers thought Churchill was a fictional character, but 58% thought Sherlock Holmes was real. The propensity to forget. God says, don't forget. God says, remember the traditions, the teachings, the truth, the laws of Almighty God, and hold fast to them. We're going to take a quick break and then come back and finish off today's show just a little bit early with this week's edition of World Watch. You're listening to Stephen Flurry, and this is the Trumpet Daily. We'll be right back.
Prosperity, government, trade, technology, stability, freedom. The last 2 centuries have been the exception in human history. How did we get here? The 19th century was dominated by an empire that exported civility, order, standards, and opened the doors for global trade. It ended slavery and implemented a system of governance that protected people's rights. And then in the 20th century, a new power came to dominate. Remarkably, one that would continue in the same traditions as its predecessor. For 200 years, the United States and Britain dominated the world stage. How did these 2 nations rise to prominence so suddenly? And why are their legacies so relentlessly attacked today? The astonishing truth is that your Bible prophesied the rise of Britain and the United States. It also prophesied their fall. The biblical identity of these 2 nations is the vital key that unlocks Bible prophecy. This lost master key to prophecy is revealed in Herbert W. Armstrong's most requested book, The United States and Britain in Prophecy. You must understand the biblical identities of these 2 nations to comprehend where we are in Bible prophecy today. To learn more about this vital truth, request your free copy of The United States and Britain in Prophecy.
Chinese General Secretary Xi Jinping met with Vietnam's top leaders on April 14th to sign numerous cooperation deals. These deals included increased railway, infrastructure, defense, and diplomacy cooperation. Xi's visit to Vietnam is part of a trip through Southeast Asia designed to strengthen China's ties with other countries in the region, especially after the U.S.'s recent tariffs on Chinese trade. Vietnam has been an important U.S. partner in the past, but as tensions and insecurities in the region rise, China is intensifying its efforts to bring Vietnam into its orbit. The Bible prophesies a powerful alliance of Asian nations, the kings of the East, which will play a pivotal role in a coming global conflict. To understand more about China's role in this alliance and the future of the Asian region, read our free booklet, Russia and China in Prophecy. The European Union and the United Arab Emirates agreed on April 10th to launch free trade talks. In a time of global uncertainty due to the US's ever-changing tariffs, the EU and UAE hope to improve their relations and economic growth with this agreement. The EU is the UAE's second-largest trading partner, responsible for 8.3% of its non-oil trade. The UAE is also Europe's largest export destination and investment partner in the Middle East and North Africa. The wealthy Gulf state has long advocated for more EU involvement in the area. As President Trump continues his aggressive global tariff policies, expect Europe and Middle Eastern nations to look to each other for alternative markets. The Bible specifically forecasts an alliance between moderate Arab nations and Europe. To learn more about this prophesied alliance, read our Trends article, Why the Trumpet Watches an Alliance Between Arab Nations and Europe. Japan has expressed interest in gaining military experience by participating in the NATO command for its mission to Ukraine, the Associated Press reported April 8th. Japanese Defense Minister Gen Nakatani met with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte in Tokyo to discuss strengthening their cooperation. Japan has already provided defense equipment to Ukraine, but it now is looking to expand its support to include troops. Although Japan's post-war constitution prohibits the nation from maintaining an offensive military force, it has been building up its firepower for decades. In recent years, it has dramatically increased its defense spending. But as a proclaimed self-defense force, Japanese troops have not fought since the end of World War II. Participating in the NATO mission to Ukraine would allow Japan to train its soldiers in modern warfare. For decades, the Trumpet has closely watched and warned as Japan has gradually remilitarized into a formidable force. To understand Japan's future and why its military growth is so important to watch, read our Trends article, Why the Trumpet Watches Japan's March Toward Militarism. To learn more about current world news and how it relates to Bible prophecy, please visit thetrumpet.com.